King John's early life was filled with as much drama and action as his kingship. Yet John was not always involved in the drama, as his family was some of the most famous figures during the High Middle Ages. His mother was Eleanor of Aquitaine, whose own achievements and tales forged an image of a woman who was determined to get her way and always strived to assist her children in gaining what she believed was rightfully theirs. And alongside is her equally famous husband and John's father, Henry II, or Henry Fitz-Empress, the man who created the Angevin Empire thanks to his family connections. Henry ruled his lands with a vigorous attitude and enjoyed the power and lands he obtained, guarding them jealously even from his own family. With parents as famous as these, John's early life would be marked by their actions. John was born in December of the year 1166 or early 1167. We are not 100% sure of the date or even the location, with some sources listing it as Oxford and others as London. Regardless, he was born in England. John would be the last child born between Eleanor and Henry, as they produced 8 children, 5 boys and 3 girls. For Eleanor, she had an additional 2 daughters from her previous marriage to the King of France, Louis VII, before their divorce. An impressively terrifying feat, as childbirth was incredibly dangerous during the Middle Ages, even for a noblewoman. So to have had 10 children and to survive is an act worthy of respect. As for John, being the last child, he was not of much concern, as King Henry had 3 older sons, Henry, Richard and Geoffrey. King Henry in 1169 agreed a treaty with the French king to divide his lands between his sons, which would see the vast empire King Henry created cut apart and shared out. His eldest son Henry would be given the Kingdom of England, the county of Anjou, as well as Normandy, and even crowned as King of England while his father was alive. This event was something that never happened in England, and as we will find out later, has never happened since. Richard would be granted the lands that his mother inherited, Aquitaine. And as for Geoffrey, he would become Duke of Brittany. As for John, it seemed he would get diddly squat, apart from some estates in England, giving to his later nickname, Lackland. John's name is also unique. This quote from Professor Nicholas Vincent gives insight into a reason for John's name. He was given a distinctively unroyal name, probably in honour of St. John the Evangelist, whose feast day fell on the 27th of December. John's eldest brothers had all been named after ruling ancestors. John's infancy would be a typical upbringing as any other royal baby of the High Middle Ages, cared for by a wet nurse, servants, friends and relations. King Henry and Queen Eleanor would conduct the business of the realm, leaving little time, if any, to spend with John. After all, the servants and other relations would look after him to the best of their abilities. And it has to be stated that John could have shared the same fate as his brother, the firstborn son of Henry and Eleanor, William, who died in infancy. John's first location we have on record was the Abbey of Fontevraud, a family favourite place, and now the resting place of most of the family. John lived here for a time with his older sister, Joanna. While John's childhood would continue like any other, significant events were happening around him. In 1169, John's mother was nearly captured by discontented barons, and in 1170, an event that became the defining mark of Henry II's reign, the murder of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket. Henry reportedly shouted a phrase along the lines of, "Will no one rid me of this turbulent priest?" The arguments between the king and the archbishop, to summarize, were over church rights and the relationship between kings and the Catholic Church. This event had an impact on lead production. As John grew older, it became clear to his father that John would need at least some lands to provide for him. To fix this issue, King Henry had diplomatic options available to him by using John to secure an alliance through marriage, which was a tactic commonly used during the Middle Ages for the nobility. John was aged around 5 or 6 years old when his father began to start matchmaking for him. Henry had started negotiations with the Count of Savoy. The lands John would gain from this match would enable Henry to expand his influence into northern Italy, as well as give another border to the Angevin Empire, encircling more of the King of France's domain. As John would have married the heir to the Count of Savoy, thus enabling John to inherit the lands and title of Count of Savoy. The only problem for John was, what did he bring to the table for the Count? Other than being the son of the King of England, John had nothing yet, as his father hadn't given him any lands, estates or titles as of yet. So Henry had to provide something, and he quickly did: a set of important castles, including the mighty castle at Chinon, one of King Henry's favourite locations. However, that castle was supposedly the younger King Henry's castle, and this did not sit well with the young lion. As for the last few years since his crowning, the young King Henry was constantly grappling with his father over power, or lack thereof. And this action of granting one of his castles to his younger brother without his consent was enough that the young Henry sought to stage his own revolt. Yet young King Henry was not in a strong position to challenge his father directly. He needed allies, and he knew exactly where to find them: his own mother and her ex-husband, the King of France. Young Henry left for Paris, and was soon followed, thanks again to their mother, by her 2 other sons, 15-year-old Richard and 14-year-old Geoffrey. We can only offer theories as to why Eleanor betrayed her husband, but the act itself was shocking. As for John, he would get to know his father and share a close relationship with him, as John was too young to be of use and was under the care of his father. King Henry was to face an uprising that featured incredibly powerful figures. Not only 3 of his sons, his wife, but the King of France, the King of Scots, William the Lion, and several barons, both English and French, all sought to take Henry down. Power, lands, and wealth were the aim of the game. On a manuscript, it would seem that King Henry would lose and would be forced to give humiliating concessions. But King Henry would not be defeated so easily, as he inherited his mother's stubborn determination, as he gained the Kingdom of England through fighting a war. Politics and warfare was second nature to Henry. Plus, he had his own key allies within his administration, as well as loads of cash to hire mercenaries, and he soon proved his superiority over his opponents. Eleanor was captured quickly, in one tale disguised as a man. This trick to escape will come up a lot in the future. Another ally of the coalition met his death via a crossbow bolt, Matthew, the Count of Boulogne. The King of the Scots, William the Lion, roared into battle and was captured immediately, and after a few more fights, King Henry was victorious, and John got to witness a masterclass, with a bit of luck, in dealing with vassals and rivals. After his brothers returned to their father's side, they were given an enlarged purse with more revenue. For John, he became his father's favourite son and would barely see his mother, so not much of a change. Now she was locked up, but not in some dingy, disgusting dungeon, although her older boys did voice their opposition to their mother's circumstances, which King Henry could use to his advantage if the cubs felt like challenging his authority again. As for John, this opened new doors for him. Now regarded as his father's favourite, the term Lackland would soon lose all meaning, as John would gain a hefty chunk of lands and revenue. His marriage arrangement with the Count fell through as his betrothed died. She did have a younger sister, but King Henry had lost interest in the match. And by 1175, John would gain lands in Cornwall as one of the last veterans of the Civil War known as the Anarchy. Reginald, Earl of Cornwall, died. He had no legitimate sons, but 3 daughters. The 3 girls would become wards of King Henry, and despite the normal circumstances of the girls gaining their inheritance, King Henry interfered and made sure John gained the lion's share of it. Now that John was given a substantial amount of estates, which would still be governed by his father's administration until he became of age. More estates were to be gained for John through marriage. Another female heir to a noble was Isabella, daughter of William, Earl of Gloucester. The main prize here for John was the city of Bristol, which would grant access to the rich trade via the port there. Yet John was too young to marry at the age of 9 and would require special permission from the Pope in accordance with canon law. While all of these events were happening, John would carry on with his education. While he lived at the Abbey, he was educated by the nuns there, and now an older John would begin his further development in training at the late age of 10. John's brothers had all begun their training at a younger age. We can offer an example of the education a boy in the upper classes of society could experience. In his 7th year, he was sent away into the care of a man of experience. This was his first loss of freedom. He had to face cares and obligations unknown to him before, a stern discipline in the shape of the study of books and languages. He had tasted freedom, only to lose it. For John, his education would now be in the care of the household of Ranulph Glanville, one of King Henry's top men. Here John would learn everything he needed, from reading and writing in Latin to the social expectations of high Middle Ages society. Some of the lessons John would attend would be in archery, chess, falconry, hunting, and horse riding. All of these lessons were crucial if John was to govern and protect his own estates. By 1177, John would be at the forefront of Henry's plan of conquering Ireland, with John being proclaimed as King of Ireland. In this episode, we are not covering John in Ireland, as that will be its own episode, because Ireland in this period is incredibly unique. The next major event for John would be in 1183. In the previous year, Henry and his sons showed by working together they could surmount any challenge that laid before them. Richard was having trouble with rebels in his lands in Aquitaine. The combined might of the Angevins quickly subdued the rebels, yet the unity of father and sons working together soon fractured. During a family gathering around Christmas in 1182, the family began to quarrel over various matters, one being homage between the brothers. This soon turned into open war between the brothers, and in turn the young King Henry revolted against his father once again, with each side squaring up. But then tragedy struck. The young King Henry fell ill and died. With his death, John would become even more important in his father's plans.